Hi everybody, welcome back to the Word from the Shed. Good to be with you again. And during these difficult times I've been looking at stories of faith in the scriptures, what you might call faith in action, where individual characters really draw on their trust in God. And if I mention to you the book of Daniel, your minds probably leap to Daniel in the lion's den, which in itself was a great act of faith on the part of Daniel. But there are other wonderful stories in the book. And Daniel is essentially a prophetic book, but the first half of it is history, and then it goes into what's called apocalyptic, which is a kind of picture language to express the truth of the kingdom of God and how things are going to be in the future. And the influence of Daniel carries right through to the book of Revelation. But the book starts with King Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian king, taking various people into exile. He invades Judah, which is the southern kingdom, after the two kingdoms had split, and Assyria had already invaded the northern part of Israel and taken people off into exile, and now the Babylonians invade Judah, and the kingdoms of Israel and Judah come to an end, very sadly. And part of the tactics of invading forces in those days was to take away the cream of the society that they'd invaded and bring them back home and re-educate them. And amongst those people were Daniel and three other chaps whose names in Hebrew were Hananiah, Mishael and Azariah. And they were taken off into the king's household to be re-educated and obviously to be used on the king's behalf. He gave them Babylonian names. Daniel became Belteshazzar, and the other three became Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Now, they were taken off to be educated by a tutor and given the best of Babylonian food to keep them healthy. But Daniel, Belteshazzar, said, well, we can't eat this because it will infringe our beliefs as Jews. And the educator said, well, if you don't eat it, you'll be all poorly and I'll lose my head. So Daniel says to him, well, just feed us for 10 days on water and vegetables and see how we look at the end. And at the end, of course, they looked healthier than all the other Babylonians. And so there was one first test of faith, that he chose to abide by God's law rather than Nebuchadnezzar's. And of course he was noted, and they were tremendously endowed with wisdom, these young men, and they grew and understood the way of Babylon very quickly. And in verses 11 to 16 says, Daniel then said to the guard whom the chief official had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael and Azariah, please test your servants for 10 days, give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink, and then compare our appearance with that of the young men who eat the royal food, and treat your servants in accordance with what you see. So he didn't say, well, we'll just see what happens and we'll hang in faith. He actually, in a way, challenged the regime, which takes that extra bit of faith, doesn't it, to stand up and say, no, we're going to do it God's way, not your way. But God favoured them, and they were promoted and began to do very well. And then chapter 2 talks about a dream that Nebuchadnezzar had. He was a pretty paranoid kind of chap, and he had this dream, and Daniel interpreted it. And so that won him a huge amount of favour as well. We get to the end of chapter 2 and we see the result of this little victory. Then the king placed Daniel in a high position and lavished many gifts on him. He made him ruler over the entire province of Babylon and placed him in charge of all its wise men. Moreover, at Daniel's request, the king appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego administrators over the province of Babylon, while Daniel himself remained at the royal court. So these young men found themselves suddenly in incredibly high positions, and it was all an act of God. We read it so many times, don't we, like Joseph in Egypt and places like that. God elevates his people in foreign lands, even though they're called to serve those people. And then in chapter 3, this vain Nebuchadnezzar decides that he's going to build a false god. He's going to build a great gold statue, 90 feet high. And when all the harps and the zithers and the lyres played around the land, everybody had to turn around and worship this idol. And as we know, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego refused to do it. And the focus in this chapter is on Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So we look at verse 12, and it says, if I can find it, yes, here we are. But there are some Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon. This is all the sneaks reporting on him, the satraps and the treasurers and people like that, reporting on Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But there are some Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who pay no attention to you, O king. They neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold that you have set up. Furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king. And Nebuchadnezzar said to them, Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold I have set up? And he goes on and says, well, yes, it is quite true, because we can't do that. It's we're Jews, we worship the one God, and that's where it finishes. So they again stood up to him. And then we go to verses 16. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, which he threatened them with, the God we serve is able to save us from it, and he will rescue us from your hand, O king. But even if he does not, we want you to know, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold that you have set up. Now, isn't that wonderful? Their first response is their trust in God, that even if you do chuck us in this burning fiery furnace, he'll rescue us. But if he should not, we're still not going to bow down and worship your idol. Men of steel, I would say. My goodness me, don't we need people of steel these days in all the confusion that surrounds us? So Nebuchadnezzar was furious with these men, and he threw them into the fiery furnace, and he made it 5 or 7 times hotter, I can't remember, so that even the guards who pushed them in were burnt up before they even got into it. But then what happened? Nebuchadnezzar was shocked. He saw as he looked into the fiery furnace that there in fact were 4 men walking around. Not just Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, but one other. And the flames were not even touching them. And when he said, come out, they came out of the fire, the 3 of them, and they weren't even smoking. Their turbans and their clothing had not even been touched. Well, this was a powerful sign, wasn't it? So if we have a look at verse 28 at the end, this is where I'm coming to a finish. Nebuchadnezzar said, Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's command, and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore I decree that the people of any nation or language who says anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego will be punished in terrible ways. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. They got another promotion at the end of it. It didn't change Nebuchadnezzar. He was still as perverse and capricious as always. But it was a statement that these men made. And of course the whole thing resulted in the end of Babylon being crushed, and a man called Cyrus, king of the Persians, was used by God to bring the Jews back out of Israel and back to their promised land. So standing in faith. We need to stand in faith in these turbulent times when the Christian ethic and the Christian tradition and the glories of the gospel that have given us the life that we lead now are being questioned, are being debunked, and so many awful things happening in the world which have nothing to do with the gospel. We need to stand, even in these difficult days. We won't even be isolated, but we need to firm our belief up through steady reading of the scriptures and prayer, and deciding which side of the line we stand on. So may God bless you and keep you in these difficult times. Good to be with you again. God bless you, and bye for now.